Alright, how's it going, y'all? So today we are going over a really important video that I honestly should have done a while ago. And it is how to do a check-in on your NAS. And we're going to kind of split this up into two different parts, every month and every 6 months. And this is something that so many people forget to do, and it's how you can get bitten in the butt. We're going to be talking mostly about Synologies here, though the principles really are the exact same for pretty much any NAS you have. And it is important to remember to do check-ins on it. Because while they are incredibly stable and work great and can be on for literally years without missing a beat, it's also really important to know what's going on and that if there is a problem, it gets addressed and it's not something that you just leave running for years without ever checking in on it. I would really recommend doing these basics things here that I'm going to talk about once a month. Now, if this is something that you never use and is not that critical to you, you don't have to every month. But I would really recommend sitting down and if you can, just stick it on your calendar to do. I actually have a lot of monthly clients who I literally do this every month for them to make sure that everything's running smoothly. So that way the NAS just does not go down out of nowhere and we have no plan for getting up and running. And this is important because while NASs are incredibly stable and they work great, they also have critical data on them, especially if you're a business owner whose entire business relies on this thing. And so that is why it's really important to do this. By the way, if you like these videos, subscribe. We're trying to hit 100,000 subscribers and we are very close. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump right in, and we're going to go ahead and log into DSM to start this monthly check-in. We're going to first do the one that I recommend doing every month, and then we're going to go through and show the things to do on the kind of 6-month or biannual basis. Okay, so the very first thing we want to go ahead and do is log into DSM, and right off the bat, this is where we're going to find out the majority of things, is clicking into this notifications right here. Check out this. By the way, this NAS has been off and broken and used for tutorials, so a lot of logs are here, but things we're really looking at are like hyper backup, and anything that's kind of critical is a great place to start. And if you also come in here, you will see your system health. This is a great indicator of how your volumes are doing and everything like that. So at a glance, it's very useful to just see at the high level, but we're going to want to dive straight in and look at some logs. That's where I always like to start, just to see what's going on. So right here, this is the main log page, and this has a ton of the useful information on exactly what's going on. These are our general logs, and they're split up into a few different tabs. What I always do is just do a quick scroll through of general, and then what I'll do is I will come into our filters over here and look at our warnings and errors. And this is always just a great place to start and kind of look at, hey, where are we at? So just checking things that, hey, does this make sense? Are we looking good? And all of these things are things that I am aware of. So it is not a big deal. So it's just a great place to go through and look at your 2 errors and warnings. So nothing came up with general there, which is all good. And generally, if something's coming up in general, it's pretty direct and pretty easy to handle it. For example, this is where I did a test to rebuild the NAS. That is very clear. The pool was destroyed and we had to redo it. So it is all very clear things on if you have something to do. Once we've gone through the general, the next really useful place to be is the connection tab. And really what this is going to tell you is, hey, do you have any weird sign-ins on your NAS that are not anything you can tell? So this is where you want to go in and really look at your warnings, and you very rarely ever should have any errors, but you want to come in here and kind of check out and see, hey, are these anything that are weird or anything like that? And if you're getting a ton of failed logins here, well, what's going on? Why is that happening? If you're running this open to the internet and you've got very good security, maybe you don't worry about it as much. But if you didn't think this was open to the internet and you're getting logins from SSH, well, now you need to start asking those questions and seeing what has happened. It's very useful for telling, and in general, you're not going to have anything other than warnings. I never really see any errors. So those are all just great places to start and just kind of keeping up to date with what is going on. Though do note, just because you see attempted sign-ins on the NAS does not mean it is inherently insecure. It does mean that it is publicly accessible, which you should know. But if that is something you're using because you're using it as a Dropbox replacement and you're sharing files with public people, just know you need to make sure you keep your NAS up to date and have an extra security plan. All right, so finally, we're going to go in, and I normally skip over the file transfer tab just because it's not that useful for, hey, is something going wrong? And we're going to go over to our drives. And really, you should not have a ton of logs here unless you're running smart tests. But the easiest place to see is, are there errors? Are there any things like that? In the future, I'm probably going to do a video that kind of covers all the different errors that you can get and what to do about them in Synology NAS. But that's not for this video. Really, if you see an error here, once again, going through warning and errors, make sure you've got it dealt with or at least understand what it was. Seeing something as simple as a checksum mismatch might not be a huge deal. But if you're constantly seeing that one of your drives, the number of bad sectors is increasing, well, that probably means you need to replace the drive or that the drive is starting to die. And so this is everything you really want to check out on your logs. Kind of covers pretty much everything that's going on the NAS. And if something's an error or warning, it's a very good idea to at least understand what it was. Not necessarily guarantee that it's a true problem, but at least understand what it is. The next thing we go ahead and do is we're going to jump into our storage manager to check on the health of our pool. What I'll always just jump in here and do is make sure that a scrub has been complete in the time that it should have been. So for this pool, and for most people I will recommend, I schedule data scrubbing every 3 months. So I will always just double check, hey, has there been a scrub run in the last 4 months? If not, there's a problem. Then I'll also check in here and just make sure everything looks good. This tends to be very easy to tell. Either everything's fine or there is a clear error. If there is a drive that is having problems but is not severe enough to show this as unhealthy, you will see all that stuff in Log Center under the Drives tab or the General tab. But if there is a true issue, you will see it here, and you can look at your drive health status right here, which is just a very general indicator. I rarely do it, but if you need to, if there's a specific thing going on with a drive, you can come in here and look into really in-depth information on exactly what's going on. But in general, it is not necessary because it will generally tell you if there is something wrong. So we have gone in here, we've seen that everything's looking good, everything's looking right. The other thing I will do is, hey, this right here is an encrypted volume. Now what I need to make sure to do is I need to make sure I can locate the encryption key for this volume. This is something I recommend doing honestly once a month because you should lay your eyes on this key once a month, because if you lose that key, your data is useless and will completely disappear. So I would highly recommend laying your eyes on the encryption key once a month. I wish there was a way to test the encryption key that they've got. That's actually what I do for a lot of volumes that are shared folder encrypted, is actually test it, because losing this key and not having this key work can lead you to complete and total data loss because you lose the key and you need to get it and it is encrypted. And the problem with encryption is it's really good. If you don't have the key, you're not getting your data back. So make sure to lay your eyes on the key. Unfortunately, I don't know of a way to test the full volume encryption key right now, so that is unfortunate. I would love to see Synology add in a way to upload the file and have it check and make sure it is the right one. Okay, so those are the general pieces here on the health of the pool. One thing I will also do is I'll click into this usage tab, and what I'm looking for is snapshots taking up a ton of space. So snapshots taking up a ton of space means that a lot of files have been deleted. And that is always a good thing to just understand what happened and why. So if you've got snapshots that are taking up more than like a third of the overall volume and you've not deleted a bunch of files, check into that. See what happened and why, and just understand that. That's one really useful thing to know is like, hey, did we have a large uptick in deleted files or moved files or major changes of files? And that can be an indicator of something's going wrong. A computer's got a virus and is attempting to encrypt files on the NAS, and that's why the snapshots are taking up more space, is because it's keeping those old files. There's a lot of things that can be an indicator of, but just kind of having a ballpark figure for where your snapshots are is a really useful thing to have in the back of your mind and can spot problems. All right, so now that is everything in Storage Manager. Once again, pretty easy to tell what's going on with that. All right, so now the next thing that is critical to do is going to be to make sure our backups are working. But first, I'd like to take a quick break to thank the sponsor of today's video, DeleteMe. Did you know that your personal data is sold online by data brokers? You have the right to stay private and protect your personal data. Data brokers are corporations that collect a huge amount of personal information, like phone numbers, addresses, and even your relatives, from a variety of sources, like government public records and social media. They then aggregate this information into listings or profiles and then sell it to either other data brokers or other organizations who have an interest in your private data. Having this information out there increases the risk of being a target of identity theft, which has been made easier by the prevalence of personal information online. And that's where DeleteMe comes in. DeleteMe can help protect you from the risks of identity theft by removing your personal data from hundreds of data brokers online. They will then provide a privacy report showing what data they were able to find and remove, and will continue to monitor and repeat removals as required. I personally have used DeleteMe and recommend it to help protect your personal information. Get 20% off DeleteMe US customer plans when you go to joindeleteme.com/Rex and use promo code REX at checkout. That is code REX at joindeleteme.com/Rex. Thanks again to DeleteMe for sponsoring today's video. Now back to the video. So whatever backup system you've got, you should be testing once a month. As they say, a untested backup is wishful thinking, and testing is really easy. All you do is you click on Hyper Backup, or if you're using Snapshot Replication Backup, Snapshot Replication on the secondary unit. We're going to click on it, and we are going to check and see how it's doing. A few things we want to do is just see, hey, when was the last successful backup? When is the next scheduled backup? Do those make sense? And the next thing we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to go ahead and click on our version list. And this is another reason why we do this, is because this will test and make sure that we know the key to the backup. This right here is the encryption key we set up when we set up this backup. If I lose this key, the backup is completely useless. So it's a great idea to test it once a month, because that way you know, and if you find that you don't know the key, you can generate a new backup before it's a problem. So these are ones I set up just for this tutorial. So what I like to do is I actually like to go into the most recent backup. I'm going to go ahead and click on it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to navigate to a file that I know has been edited or modified in the last week. This is ideal to do if you're the business owner or you're the person working on it, because you know, hey, I sent that TPS report over to somebody. I worked on that, I changed that, and you're going to know if it's the right version. But it's always a great idea to come in and find a file. So we're just going to go ahead and, let's click on this guy right here. And what we're going to do is we're going to download it. And what this is going to do is this is going to do an end-to-end test of our backup system. By selecting a file that we know and that we have modified in the last week, we're going to know if this file is what it should be, and that somehow it's not skipped a bunch of versions, because we would see that because we know the file. That's the ideal world. What this is also going to do is this is going to allow you to see, hey, does the backup work? Are the files going to open successfully? So I would go ahead, I'd open up this file and just check and make sure, yes, that is the backup we expect it to be. That is the file that it should be. So now we've not only tested that, are the backups occurring, but we're also making sure that the backups are usable and resumable and that we can actually get files off of them. This is a really important thing to do, because now you're actually testing the entire workflow. If you're using any other backup methods, every single one of those other backup methods should allow you to do this in some way, shape, or form. If you're using Cloud Sync to Google Drive, do the exact same thing. Log into Google Drive, download a file, check it. If you're using Snapshot Replication, go into the secondary NAS, open up a file, do the exact same thing. If you're using iDrive or any of those other third-party services, figure out how they are going to allow you to restore your data and check a single file. Every backup solution should allow you to do this, and it is really important to test it. Another thing I would recommend doing is just do a once over. Do these folders make sense? Is this everything I want backed up? And kind of think about that, because if you find, oh, shoot, I actually probably should back up that folder, it's a great time to do it now. And that is our end-to-end test. We can also check our logs here just to see what is going on, if anything else is wonky. In this case, it wasn't working because, well, it was a test unit that I turned off. So great thing to do, and this will really help you do a large portion of making sure that the backup is restorable. right, so now that we've covered our backups, we really need to make sure of one last thing, and that is that the NAS can tell us if something's going wrong. These first 4 things that I've gone through are all really critical. Every single one of them is a really important part of making sure that your data is going to be there no matter what. And the last one is making sure that the NAS has the ability to tell us what is going on. So right here, log into Control Panel, go into your email and send a test email. You need to make sure that you can get emails from the NAS, or if you're using some other webhook or whatever in the world you're using, make sure that you're doing that. Because if you don't have those emails, the NAS can't tell you if there's something really wrong going on, and you've got a huge problem. I test every single one of my NAS's email servers every single month, because you need to know if you're going to get that email where there's a critical issue going on. It's a really important thing, and just double check that you got that and it wasn't put in your spam folder, and you don't have a rule that sends all these notifications to a folder that you never check. If you're getting too many emails from the NAS, change what emails you're sending yourself, but never set up a rule that just sends them to nowhere because they're too annoying and you don't really care about them. If you're getting redundant emails, remove them out. I cannot stress that enough, because this is your first line of defense for pretty much anything going wrong. If the NAS is having a problem, 9 times out of 10, it knows it for a long time, and you can act on it very, very easily as long as you get the email notice. All right, so now we've gone through the 4 most important things to do every month, and this should cover pretty much everybody who's using the NAS as a file server. I'm going to talk about a few additional things that you want to check on, and these are tasks that you should have running. So there's a few of them here. So if you're using something like Synology Drive Share Sync, well, check and make sure it's still linked. Check and make sure that communication is going on and you're not having any errors. A simple click into it is normally enough to tell what is going on and if there's a problem. If you're using something like Active Backup for Business or Active Backup for MS365 or Google Workspace, do the exact same restore test I just talked about with Hyper Backup. So simply log into each of their restore portals, find a computer, find a device, and check it and make sure you can download a file from it. That is really important to do, because you can get lulled into the sense of, hey, the NAS is doing it, everything's fine. And then you find out 6 months, 8 months, 2 years later, oh, I never set up that task, or oh, that certificate changed, or something happened where it was not running. It's really important to check on all those really important tasks once a month. And that is as simple as going in, checking that specific application's logs, and doing that simple restore test that I talked about for anything that's critical. Obviously, you don't have to do that with every single laptop in the company, but it's important to at least make sure that that really important server, that if it goes down, the entire company's in trouble, make sure that is getting backed up and check a file on that. Now, our final piece is updates. I would always at least come in here, go into update and restore, and check out and see what updates are available, and also just have a way to keep up to date with important updates. So for example, the update from 3 to 5 was actually not that critical, so I'm not going to say you have to do it right now, but that's because I know this and I kind of live in this world. In general, I would recommend checking the release notes. And if you're a system that really just needs to be stable and you want to make sure that you don't have any trouble at all, maybe you don't update every version, but at least be aware of what the updates are. Then if you see one that does have a security update, at least understand what that security update is fixing and see if you need to do it or not. I personally wait and I test all updates on different systems for about a month before pushing it to my client systems, just because you never know what happens and you'd rather not push an unstable update that has a weird bug. But come in and do that on both DSM for Control Panel and go into Package Center and check out what each of these guys are and just understand what they need to do. If you are going to update and this is a critical system, I would probably recommend, if at all possible, update on a backup unit just to test it first. And at minimum, do it outside of business hours where you can test everything and not have it be a big deal. But that's where you can go ahead and do your updates and just make sure you're not really far behind on anything. All right, well, that is it for our monthly check-in. We've essentially covered everything we need to do to make sure that the NAS just keeps maintaining and keeps running well. Now I want to talk about the things that I do on my 6-month basis that is kind of the more in-depth look into. So what I like to do is I like to come in and I like to test and just make sure that, hey, do all these settings make sense, and make sure that there's a few things that haven't gotten changed. And these are the really important ones that you need to have. So what I'll always do is I'll double check our users and group and make sure that the admin and the guest account are deactivated. If you're running on admin, really get off that if at all possible and change on over. And another thing I will do is I will also open up our administrators group and just do a check. Does everybody in the administrators group make sense? And just very general tests like that. Another thing I will do is I will come in and I will do a full domain test. If they're hooked up with a domain or LDAP, there is a test button on that. If you got that set up, I actually end up doing that on my monthly check-in, but at least make sure to check that. And once again, see what permissions administrators have and see who is in that group, just to have a thought check. Hey, does that make sense? The next thing I'll do is click on network interfaces, and check the speed of the connections. Are they the speed I would expect them to be? 1000 megabit, 1000 megabit. Yep, that is a gigabit connection. That is good. One thing that is very common to happen is if you've got a bad cable, it will negotiate to a fast Ethernet 100 megabit connection because that only requires 2 twisted pairs instead of 4. So it's a great idea to just come in and check that and see, oh, that's why I'm getting all these performance issues. And so I would recommend doing that exact same thing. Just make sure your network interface speeds are what they should be. The next thing I'll do is I'll check on terminal. If SSH is enabled, I need to understand why. I enable it on a bunch of systems because I SSH into stuff all the time, but especially if I'm managing a client system and SSH is enabled, I will always ask them, hey, are you SSHing in? What are you doing with that? Just making sure that I understand what is going on, and if it's not necessary, disable it. Just because that's one of those things that it's hard to get yourself in trouble through DSM, but SSHing in, and especially if you don't really know what you're doing, you can get yourself in a lot of trouble. Then I'll go into security, and I always check, make sure adaptive MFA is on, and it's a good idea to also enable account protection. Depending on the security required, also forcing 2-factor for admins is a great idea. Checking our auto block settings, making sure they make sense. Opening up the block list as well, making sure I understand what things are in the block list. So those are a lot of the key ones from a security perspective. And then just from a goodness perspective, I'll always pop in here, and I always want the power to restart automatically when the power supply is fixed. So that way if the power goes out, the NAS turns itself back on. And if there is a UPS hooked up to the NAS, especially a smart one, I will go in and I will always make sure that it's working. And there is a test button right here that'll show you the information and make sure they're communicating well. I will then also read through our task scheduler. An important one to make sure is that you've got some kind of empty bin schedule going there, because if you don't have that, your recycling bins will never get emptied and it will just fill up, fill up, fill up. Then the last thing I will do is I will always check the snapshot settings. So I will come in here and I will check and make sure that we've got snapshots on all of the folders that make sense to have snapshots on, as well as just make sure that they've run recently and that we have the correct number of versions, and kind of everything was set up well with those, which is really important to do just to make sure, hey, did I add a folder and forget to enable snapshots on it, and all those good things. And that's pretty much it. With all of this, we now know pretty much everything that needs to get done, and making sure that our NAS is running optimally, and that even if there is a critical problem, we're ready for it. And it's one of those things that is just a great idea to put on your monthly calendar just to do, spend an hour doing it a month. And it can really make sure that when stuff hits the fan, you are back up and running really quick. Because we put such critical files on a NAS, it's really important to make sure that we have an entire plan and that our NAS is going to be able to survive no matter what happens. All right, well, that's going to be it for this tutorial. Go ahead and leave any other tutorials you'd like to see me make down in the comments below. And if you want to hire me, there's a link for that down in the description below. All right, have a good one. Bye.